All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Holy Face Generations podcast. We're back. It's just me and Mom today, but that's okay because we got a really good discussion to go into, right, Mom?
I think so, yes.
We're talking about the book of Job, and that might be a little bit of a diversion, some people would say. What does the book of Job have to do with the Holy Face?
Yeah.
But we're going to be talking about the immense parallels, right, Mom?
There are, and in fact, there's so many, we probably won't get to all of them today. So we're just going to focus in on the main basic prefiguring, we'll say, in the book of Job of the Holy Face devotion. And, that gives another indication of how important this devotion must be if there's, such enormously detailed prefiguring in the book of Job in the Old Testament. And,
So you're kind of saying that there's almost like a pre Holy Face devotion in the Old Testament. Is that the right way to say it, or
yeah,
probably a little off?
the both the offenses that were committed in this book, and also the way in which it was remedied. That's a big parallel, but it's surprising even the details of Job's life when he was suffering, that is prefiguring elements of the devotion too. And so I know people may not be familiar with the book of Job, so I'm just going to give a real brief recap, and then that will allow me to start talking about some of these parallels. And I just want to put everybody's mind at ease. My book does have the imprimatur and the nihil obstat, because this is some unique analysis along with other things in the book. And I don't want people to be uncomfortable with that. I will say that Venerable DuPont gave just a couple Easter eggs, a couple statements that kind of alerted people to maybe there being this situation of prefiguring. And
So before we get ahead of ourselves, we're basically saying, or you're basically saying, that the book of Job has so many parallels to the Holy Face devotion that it's something that should almost be connected in a way. Is that right? Or at least it's
yes,
something we should pay attention to.
I think so. I would say that elements of the devotion I didn't really fully appreciate until I realized the prefiguring in the book of Job, and it helped me understand
I
it
think
a
you're right.
little
I think I
better.
felt the same way. I was of the mindset that, you know, maybe it's too new, maybe it's too different. But then when I read your book and I saw the parallels to the book of Job, I thought, oh wow, this is something that has always been blasphemy has always been important to God, and it's always been a way that we're tempted, and we must make reparations. And even doesn't the book even mention the book of Job mention the face of God?
It does, and that is one thing that I think really surely caught the attention of Venerable DuPont, because he was just an absolute lover of Scripture and he knew it inside and out. He would have been reading the Douay-Rheims version, which utilizes that phrase, as opposed to newer versions don't. And so I'll get into that.
Yeah, we're getting ahead of
Yes.
ourselves. Let's start with the book of Job.
Okay. So
And a lot of people, they don't like that book. It's kind of a hard read. There's actually a famous song. One of the verses in the song is, "When I thought the book of Job was a job." I doubt you've heard that song, and I don't even know if it's a good song. I can't remember. But let's start there. Let's start with the book of Job,
okay.
and let's learn about it.
Sure. Okay, so Job was a very ancient figure in the Bible. I believe he came before Abraham. Some of this has been so long since I researched, so I might need to double check that. But
If you're wrong, you're going to
I
be
know I can't be wrong.
embarrassed.
So we won't go there. We'll just say he was a very ancient figure in the Old Testament. He did fear the true God, though he was not an Israelite, and he was enormously blessed. He had wealth. He had a beautiful family, many children, a loving wife, just everything that you can imagine. And yet he was very, very pious. He was just, this enormous example to look up to. And so this caught the attention of Satan, and he challenged God that, surely if Job is stripped of all these blessings, that he will curse you to your face. And Just a side note, it's interesting. He didn't he didn't choose another sin to want to really hurt God with, so to speak. He chose blasphemy.
He
And
just wanted to get him to blaspheme, right?
yeah, so it's not like he was saying, well, if he's stripped of these blessings, he's going to go out and murder someone or any other sin you can think of. No, he wanted to tempt Job to blaspheme, which we've been talking about. It is actually the greatest sin, and it's sort of the signature sin of Satan. And just a little bit of a divergence, I guess. You can think of even Adam and Eve. When you really think about that, that was the temptation. It's not wrong to want to be like God, which is what Satan was offering Adam and Eve. We've been talking about last time we talked about both in the Eucharist and in the Holy Face devotion. The whole point is to become more and more godlike. It's not as if in the Eucharist somehow he takes on our traits. Of course, it's the other way around. And same with the Holy Face devotion. The more we make reparation, the more his image is imprinted upon our souls, and the more and more we become like Christ, like God. And so the sin of Satan was that he wanted to be like God for selfish reasons, and he went about it in a disobedient manner. Kind of a twofold situation there.
Blasphemous manner.
A blasphemous manner. And this is what he was tempting of Adam and Eve. He didn't want them to be like God for selfless reasons, but to bring out their selfishness and their desire to, focus on themselves, and also to be disobedient in doing so. And, with blasphemy, that's one of the first three commandments are to prohibit blasphemy in various forms. And so, when we're blaspheming, it's disobedience, and it's also, wanting to draw attention to ourselves, somehow making ourselves like in a position to actually misuse God's name and honor and glory. And
disrespect him.
yes,
And it's also interesting because kind of the modernist idea that you can do anything as long as you don't hurt anybody. Well, technically, Adam and Eve didn't hurt anybody. They just ate a fruit.
that's a good point.
And yet they created original sin and basically caused sin to enter the world by doing that. And so, sometimes people maybe wave away blasphemy by saying, well, you're not hurting anybody, you're not really doing anything bad. But I would say, well, Adam and Eve didn't hurt anybody. The main thing that they did wrong was that they disrespected God.
Yes, that is very true. And you bring up a good point. Modernism, just by the name, we think it's like something new. No, the sins of modernism are the sins of Lucifer. It's just they've been updated, kind of. I know I briefly mentioned this before, but like even before modernism, rationalism, its goal was to define truth in a way that did not rely upon the authority of God. And so, they thought, oh, well, if we just reason with our minds, that's going to let us use argumentation as the arbiter of truth. And then we had modernism that introduced kind of like this idea that truth could change and could even be subjective, even with feelings being involved. And then we have the relativism, where there's kind of no objective truth because it's either your truth or my truth and so forth. And then finally, wokeism, it's like really seems an inversion of the truth and morality as outlined in, moral law, natural law, the Ten Commandments, the doctrine of the faith preserves all this. But the reason I wanted to go off on that tangent is because basically that thinking is what is the problem in the book of Job. So let's go back to the story.
Yeah, let's get back to the story.
Okay, so then God, he grants this challenge of Satan. And so Job does lose his wealth. He loses his health to leprosy. He loses his children. They all die. His wife isn't really a support anymore. She challenges him just curse God and die, and just be over with it. This is just too much for anyone to take. And then the big thing too that he suffers is that his friends just cannot believe that he's innocent because they are so certain of their own idea of a just God. They think, well, a just God would never allow a pious man to suffer like this. Therefore, he must not be pious. He must have sinned grievously to, deserve this kind of life. So they wanted to make, like they were trying, just in the way that Satan was joining piety with prosperity, they were trying to, connect guilt with calamity, basically, or a bad
So
life
it's so easy to
circumstance.
think about that too. I always think, oh, if I do something wrong, maybe I'll, get some sort of karmic punishment, or if I do something right, maybe I'll get some sort of blessing, extra blessing. And I think that sometimes that happens, but also it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that you can earn your own blessings. And that's kind of pride, right? If you think,
It
oh, I'm
is.
going to do a good deed and this will cause me to get more money or something like that. I think, is it true to say that's a form of pride where you're almost trying to make God meet your demands versus letting
Yes,
whatever happens happen?
it is. And also that kind of ties in with that heresy of Jansenism, which that was that was prevalent before the time of Sister Saint Pierre, before Saint Therese came after Sister Saint Pierre. But I think they both, in a sense, Sister Saint Pierre was just going off the revelation, so it's not like she herself was reacting to that heresy, but certainly the revelations seem to correct that heresy, and so did the prayer life of Saint Therese. And the heresy had a lot to do with this emphasis on our personal merits, like that if we just can earn so
We
many.
can earn our own salvation.
Yes, basically that is what it was, and it had complicated ideas of free will and even predestination. It sort of introduced that, and so it was a mess. And I think that that was it. You're right. That's was a huge problem. Some might say now we're swinging the other pendulum where it's like, oh, God is so merciful. Just no worries. He'll see your point of view.
Yeah,
That kind of thing.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I think because it's complicated too, because we've talked about how blasphemy does cause, or at least in the time of the French Revolution, part of that was a result of the blasphemy. So it was kind of like a punishment from God. And we've seen in the Old Testament when the Israelites do something wrong or idolatrous or blasphemous, that God will punish them. And so it's kind of complicated because sometimes it is true that you do get a punishment for doing something wrong, and also, like, for instance, if you always lie, usually the lie catches up to you in some kind of mysterious way, as I have found out in my life, or various different situations like that. So there is kind of something to be said about things can what goes around comes around, I guess.
Right.
But we can't earn our own salvation at the same time.
That's right. And it's kind of like, God allowing us to experience the natural consequences of a lie or blasphemy in general, those kinds of things. But he is doing it in a just manner to bring us around. He's allowing it so that it brings us back to proper fear of the Lord. And I guess the main thing is, back to the book of Job, that we can't put God in a box and say, well, he will necessarily behave in a certain way. This is God we're talking about. And so that's kind of all right. So back to
We're having a tough
Job.
time getting through this story.
That's okay. That's why I knew we
We're
can't
doing a
get
deep
through
dive.
it all. Yeah,
If you
right.
want to, if you want the synopsis, go. I guess read the Spark Notes or whatever.
Yeah,
But,
that's right. That's right. You can go to the book and read it too. But yeah, so Job was deeply offended by his friends keeping accusing, or
Continually.
yeah, continually accusing him. And so he has this really long debate, as Tom kind of alluded to, and he is trying to speak of God's justice, but also maintain his innocence. Well, he gets a little carried away. He kind of complains too much, and we would say probably we would all be the same way if we went through what he went through. And I certainly complain enough. It's a human nature. And but it was to the point where it was sort of like implying that God had treated him unjustly. And so we have two things going on. The friends are contorting the truth by ignoring Job's innocence to fit their narrative. So we have the idea, they're creating their own truth. And then we have Job himself, who he, kind of did almost call out God in a sense, trying to establish his own morality in the sense of telling, implying what God should do. And so, God is the highest standard of justice. We don't get to decide what is, morality. That is his decision. We don't get to decide what is truth. That is God's decision. That is, these are two no-nos. And so this was both going on. And then a youth did eventually interject and say, well, punishment could mean be a means of purification. So it's not necessarily that this is, reflecting some evil thing that.
That's always the worst when a young person teaches you a
I
lesson.
know, and talk about bringing them humility. That I'm sure was very humbling. And then it got even worse because God himself then speaks up and he says, well, people who are under affliction should bend humbly to their creator and ruler and adhere to being, a proper fear of the Lord, basically. And, in other words, you shouldn't be scrutinizing what is going on, but just realize, okay, I can't understand. I trust that God has a reason for this. And, I'm going to keep fearing him in terms of honoring him and glorifying him, even through this difficult time. And so that's what should be happening. And so Job, he felt terrible, and he did, do penance, and he confessed humbly about his sin. And so God becomes very pleased with him. But then he says to the friends, he had this phrase, they had not spoken what was right before him, meaning God. And so he said that they are not to present their own face in making reparation. That's a third point, is these offenses need to be repaired. He said, don't present your own face, present Job's face, and with whom I'm well pleased. And so this is remarkable.
Huge parallel.
Yes,
That's just
very huge.
basically what the devotion says, only it's Jesus's face.
Yes, that's right. So that is the huge parallel going on, is that we're like both Job and the friends, because we are like the friends in that we are not worthy to present our own faces. We need to rely on the merits that are in Christ's face and present those to the Father in reparation for modern sins of blasphemy. And yet we're like Job, because we do need to make reparation for our friends, meaning the masses, and obviously always including ourselves, but to go out and make reparation for everybody, which this devotion promises can happen. And so
I was really struck when, because growing up, I was always hearing about this devotion, and because of Mom's particular interest in it, and I kind of was always confused, like what does the face mean? Like, why is that so important? And then when I saw in the book that it specifically mentions presenting Job's face, that was kind of one of the first things that really caused me to take it more seriously, because it's like, wow, this happened thousands of years ago, and kind of the same language was used. It's interesting how it gives it a little bit more credibility in my mind.
Yes, and I remember when I was first reading and trying to understand more about the devotion, that was just something that I didn't quite get, was the offering of the face. And this was from someone that has had read quite a bit about the devotion, and sadly, I think maybe people in times past, closer to the time of Sister St. Pierre, they would have understood exactly what that meant, like right away. But we in this time period have sort of lost that. And so really it was not until I started to understand this parallel with the book of Job that I finally got it. I thought, oh, this I get. And I'm certain that, like I said, that caught the attention of Venerable DuPont. He never said anything about that particular parallel, and in fact, he only made two statements. He said that we do not lose time in praying for our friends, which we're praying for our friends in the Holy Face devotion. And oh yeah, I guess, did I say this, that we only the only time in Scripture that God promises to hear the prayer of someone is in this book of Job. And yet he is doing that in the Holy Face devotion. He does have promises that, they're basically like, well, this is what he promises. So we can rely on that, and we can feel comfortable with that. Those were the Easter eggs that I was talking about. And that then, it just kind of started to unfold. Once you see a couple of the big parallels, then more and more come to surface, and those I think will wait for another time, because they do get into more of the details of his life. But yeah.
But during that time when Sister Mary first got the revelations, are you saying that people were so much more well educated on the Bible that to them the term of the face kind of made more sense to them than it might in today's day and age?
I think so, for two reasons. Yeah. One is that they would have been using the Douay-Rheims version, which really utilizes that expression a lot. Like, there's so many references to the face. But just to give an example, in newer versions of the book of Job, there is no mention of the offering of the face. They just say, oh, well, Job has to intercede for his friends. That's how they say it. And so, unless you happen to have read the Douay-Rheims version a lot, and that was, I think, the thing that keyed me off, is I started to read the Douay-Rheims just by chance, and then I was like, oh, okay, now I get this. And then,
so if you're gonna read after you watch this episode, you should probably read the Douay-Rheims version.
Yeah, it takes a little getting used to. The language is older and maybe more symbolic, but richly symbolic. And there's a lot of unpacking that can be done from that. But then when you get used to it, you really strongly prefer that version, I think. And the other thing I think that was going on for me personally is just not understanding any devotions very well. Like, this now we are, I think, more mindful of, like, the Divine Mercy devotion, which helps in the mindset I'm going to talk about. But, like, say with the Sacred Heart, it didn't understand, offering the heart and that sort of thing to God the Father. With Divine Mercy, it became familiar with that. And there's, for the sake of the sorrowful passion, and you are making an offering to God the Father of Christ, and that sort of started to help me understand. But yeah, I think back in the time of Sister St. Pierre, this whole notion, like she had lots of times when she would say that she was offering some aspect of Christ's life to God the Father to sort of request special favors or something. And so it was very much more normal for her understanding, I think.
I've always been kind of confused about why. I'm starting to learn more about we have to rely on Christ's merits to offer to God, not just our own. but I've always been kind of confused why people offer things up to God. Like, can you go a little more into that? Because to me, honestly, sometimes I think, why don't you just pray like normal, like a normal person?
Yeah.
What is all this stuff about, oh, I need to offer like this thing to God or this thing to God? And I know that we kind of do that in the sacrament of the Eucharist,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
We're offering the body and blood of Christ to God, right?
Yes.
But why is it important to? I don't know. I guess I just, maybe it's a foreign concept to me, or still somewhat foreign, but I just don't know why people offer stuff like that.
Yeah, I would say a lot of it goes back to the Old Testament, and the importance of making offerings to God. Well, those days maybe it took the form of animals and so forth. Uh, but also, there's kind of I think a really Carmelite notion that we should not approach God the Father without taking with us Christ, and therefore Mary too. But like we're just not worthy, and it's kind of like how we have this notion that it's easier for us. It goes better for us if we utilize Mary to approach Christ and kind of always do that in unison. She's the mediator for Christ, but then really Christ is the mediator for God the Father, and so we it's kind of like you don't want to
Approach an
show up.
important
Yeah,
person.
right. You don't want to go to the king's, visit the king without bringing him a little gift of some sort, and what better gift than some aspects of his son's sacred humanity, and we can learn by doing this, and it's a very humbling thing to do, to constantly realize, well, I'm really not worthy to approach God to ask for this without bringing something with me, and I think that to maybe a lower degree is why we rely on the saints so much. We know it will go better for us if we can have them ask, if we can present their faces to God instead of ours. We know that.
Just like Job's friends.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, okay, that's starting to make more sense. The one other thing though that I wonder, and I don't know if this is more of like a new age thing, that maybe isn't even, maybe it's not even the right thing to do. I don't really know, but I've heard people say, oh, you need to have a personal relationship with God. You need to talk to him, and is that, how does that tie in? Because that kind of is the opposite situation where, in a sense, maybe would that be prideful to think that you have some sort of personal relationship with him, or should we think of it more as a we need to bring offerings and stuff like that? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that and I get the confusion. We absolutely should have an ongoing personal relationship with Christ, especially, and yet to do that, it's maybe good to always have Mary sitting next to us. It's just kind of she can lead us. We rely on her to help us in that way. She kind of can help present the best side of us to enhance things better for us, I guess you could say. But
Like
yeah,
the wedding feast, when
yes,
she
exactly.
asks for
Yes,
Jesus to turn the water into wine. He maybe wouldn't have done it if she hadn't asked him specifically.
that's right. And we can ask for a better relationship with him and ask Mary to help us with that. And
Yeah.
it's definitely very important. And that whole concept of mental prayer is super important. Just even 10 or 15 minutes a day. If we maybe it'll help us to sort of contemplate Christ in some way, whether it's in the scriptures or in adoration, or by gazing upon his face, but to selflessly just get to know him, and just like you would any friend in a relationship, and be able to talk to him very casually and yet so respectfully, and also realize, well, I've got his mother here that's helping me, and but yeah, that is super important.
I think a good example of kind of a personal relationship with God that also is not prideful whatsoever would be kind of like if you read some of the Psalms. Some of them
Yes.
are very raw and to the point, and they're almost like you're writing a letter to a friend or something like that. And some of them could almost be like a text message in terms of how
It's
kind of to the
true.
point they are. But I guess there's different styles that we can deploy in our
Yeah.
lives, and sometimes we need to ask for Mary's intercession, and then sometimes maybe if you're just going through something in the moment, maybe you just kind of make a short prayer that's a little less formal. And what do you think about that? Is that a good idea?
No, I think that's really good. And I personally have always been drawn to the Psalms. That's my favorite part of every day's reading because they you like you say, they're so raw and they really we can identify with them. I know that's like a technique in creative writing is you always want to be able to draw people in and identify with them in some way. And the Psalms certainly do that. And they kind of repeat some of the big things that have happened in the regular part of Scripture in the Old Testament and kind of hone in on some points. And so I think if you're kind of stuck and want maybe a fun way to delve into Scripture, that to me it seems like a go-to.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So let's tie back in a little more with the Holy Face devotion, because we talked about Job, we talked about the offering of Job's face from his friends. For those less familiar with the Holy Face, why don't you kind of tie in the similarities
Okay.
in try to keep it concise, Mom, if you
Okay.
can.
Yeah. So basically, in the book we have, first of all, the prefiguring of these sins of our time, making up our own truth, making up our own morality. And those were the things that were going on in this conversation that Job had with his friends. And then the correction by God, which, okay, let's tie in the Holy Face devotion. It's all about making reparation for blasphemy, which can take the form of ideologies. And the thing that is blasphemous about our modern ideologies is that they do involve contorting the truth, making up our own truth, and making up our own morality. We're no longer referencing God's absolute authority and the immutable truth of God. We are just, in Christ's words in the devotion, we are absolutely incredulous and
We're kind of
and yeah, and wait, what was it? Forget. Deep-rooted sin and absolute incredulity were the things that he identified. And so it's just like we are rejecting his truth to the point of making up our own. And
like Job's friends.
yes, yes. And even Job was involved
Oh
to,
yeah.
some extent. And then, we have the correction by God, which he has done in this devotion as well. The correction of how do we correct this? In other words, and in the devotion, we offer Christ's face to the Father in reparation for these modern blasphemies. And in the book of Job, he had the friends utilize Job's face, and again, kind of a prefiguring of Christ's face in making reparation for these sins. So it's not only an acknowledgement of the sins and the fact that we need to make reparation, but it's also explaining how we make reparation.
By
And
offering the
yeah,
face.
because these are bad enough sins. Again, it's these are the worst sins according to Christ. They're not our words, and so they're bad enough that we need to rely on His weight, His merit, His love in making the reparation. And
Well, and even oh, did you have one more point?
oh no, go ahead and I'll remember this.
Okay. Even in the book of Job, his wife, the big thing she tries to say is curse God and die. And that's super similar to, I think, a lot of the kind of doomer, depression, modernist ideas that some people get into. Some people try to be adopting these modernist ideas because they want to create a utopia where everybody gets along, everybody is super diverse and creating a culture where anything is fine or whatever. And that's one side of it. But then the other side that I notice, especially with young men and some guys even my age, is they're being tempted to curse God and die. They're having a tough lot right now. And my heart goes out to them. And we all experience some of that. But their big temptation is curse God and die. And I think that's the other side of the modernist, mindset is, yes, you want to create these whole new ideas that are going to overhaul truth, overhaul everything. But then you also have the other side where if you are sad, then curse God and die. And even people, I almost a year ago to this day, one of my closest friends, unfortunately, killed himself. And I don't think that it's tough because I don't want to get into that too much, but it kind of seems like something that Job would have been tempted to do and something that we should really try to avoid is
Yeah.
this mindset of curse God and die. And I think that's what the devil really wants us to do. And I don't know. Can you bail me out of this one, Mom? I'm getting
No,
on a tangent.
no, you're not. Actually, that was a huge point I forgot to make, was that Job did not even blaspheme. And even more, he did not doubt nor deny the existence of God. And, he had that famous phrase, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord, which even that is a parallel because in the devotion, the one side of the cross, sit nomen domini benedictum, blessed be the name of the Lord. And the other one is the other side begone Satan. And so, yes, you're right. I mean, we have, I know in Canada, so much euthanasia, and it's starting to creep into our country and other countries. And it's just astounding that, people are being encouraged to give up and to not utilize their suffering for a higher means and make sense of it. And it is tragic because there's so many people that, they're just, they're trapped in what they consume online and in social media. And these things aren't really talked about or uplifted, I suppose.
Yeah, sometimes social media actually is kind of similar to Job's friends, where they're all telling, like, sometimes you'll log on to social media and it'll be like the type of thing where it's like, oh, if your life isn't good, it's because you're not making enough money or you're not, it's always your fault. And yes, there's personal accountability, but it's also important not to get into this discouraged mindset where, sometimes bad things just happen and it's just as simple as that, and we don't have to say, oh, God is mad at me, and that's why these things are happening. Sometimes it's just one of those things. And the strong temptation for people to be depressed and kind of doomers in today's culture, I don't think that's very far separated from the rejection of morality and of God. And I think that people kind of get into that because they don't really believe in God, and they think, well, what point is there
Right.
anyway? And I guess I understand, if you really don't believe, then honestly, sometimes you don't just want to keep suffering for no reason.
Yes. No, that is very true.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
so is there anything else you wanted to touch on?
Well, I realized maybe I could just say a little bit about Mary in the devotion. At some point we'll talk about this in more depth, but she is it's a very Marian devotion. Christ wanted her to have the privilege of giving this devotion to man, and he had told Sister St. Pierre to honor her, and then just like, almost immediately she was inspired to, salute her with the title of Our Lady of the Holy Name of God. And so that those are two big ways. But later in Sister St. Pierre's spiritual life, she really experienced a lot with Mary, and there's a big tie-in with that, and that'll be a topic for another discussion. But I just thought we could at least mention that much. And some people don't realize how Marian the devotion is, and that actually makes them feel uncomfortable because they don't know that right off, and so it's
Well,
worth
can you give us
mentioning.
at least a little bit?
Yes,
Is it? We might have to just do a whole separate episode.
Yes,
on that.
I think so. There's a lot.
That's fair enough. All right. Well, I think we covered the basis here for the most part. We got a little off track in several different ways, but that's good. I think we explored the topic pretty well. And you said that if they do want to read the book again, to reread it, they should probably do the Douay-Rheims. And then what's your book called if they want to read kind of, because you did, your whole first chapter is on this, right?
Yeah, it's actually kind of the introduction, because it makes such a good introduction with all the parallels.
I don't think I would have read the rest of the book if I hadn't read that chapter.
Yeah.
I think that, and I'm not much of a reader. Mom's book was the first book I read in probably 10 years, believe it or not.
Well, and actually this introduction, it's unveiling the sixth station of the cross, reparation of the Holy Face, mother of all devotions. But Tom sort of motivated me, because I remember when he was a teen, that was the one thing I had done, was this introduction. And I said, Tom, I think this would really help you. Will you read this? And you said, no, Mom, but I tell you what, if you ever get it published, then I'll read it.
You're making me sound like such a bad son.
No.
No, Mom, don't bother me. I'm not reading this.
I didn't mean it like that. But
No, I know. I mean, truthfully, I probably just didn't want to read it. I'll be honest. But, I'm glad I did. And
and it motivated me. I thought,
I told her, once you finish the book, I'll read the book. And maybe in my head, I thought that she would never finish it, and then I would never have to read anything. But that was a little bit of a different time. You know how we are. Everybody's a little different when they're younger. But anyway, I think we covered it. I think this was a good episode. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you in the next one. We're going to film a little special episode as well this week. You got a final prayer, Mom?
Sure. Let's do Sit Nomen Domini Benedictum. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
There you go. Thank you, everybody.